Hi, my name is Cindy Grimes, and I'm inspector with the Hazardous Waste Program with the State of Vermont Waste Management and Prevention Division. And I'm here to talk about universal waste in Vermont. You may ask, what are universal wastes? Well, universal waste is a category of hazardous waste that is exempt from hazardous waste requirements, only if specified handling and recycling practices are followed. And they are very common in both business and households and are low risk when handled properly. Thus, they can be regulated separately. When generated by businesses and municipalities, universal wastes are subject to our regulations, but they have their own regulations called the universal waste regulations. And state or federal programs may add new categories of universal waste or be petitioned to add new categories. And examples of these new categories are post-consumer paints and aerosol cans, which will be incorporated into our hazardous waste regulations here in Vermont, either at the end of 2020 or the beginning of 2021. And the waste-specific programs exist to encourage recycling. So types of universal waste are batteries, for example, lithium, mercury, silver ion, and nickel cadmium, certain pesticides, mercury thermostats, lamps, for example, fluorescent bulbs, mercury-containing devices such as switches and gauges, and CRTs, aka cathode ray tubes. And I'll be talking about each of these types later on in the presentation. So universal waste regulations vary between individual states. For example, one state may have waste antifreeze that can be managed as universal waste, and another may have aerosol cans, for example, into their universal waste rules. Universal waste varies depending on what state you're living. So what makes Vermont different? So Vermont has added these wastes to the universal waste category. PCB containing fluorescent light ballast, which is not a universal waste in all states, CRTs, and post-consumer paint. Again, that was added by statute, though it is undergoing a revision in our regulations, as I stated before. So the Vermont universal waste regulations are in subchapter 9 of our Vermont Hazardous Waste Management regulations. And these regulations are preventative in nature to protect human health and the environment. Universal waste also do not count toward your hazardous waste generator status, so you don't have to calculate them when trying to figure out if you're a CEG or SQG or an LQG. They do not count at all. And importantly, household generated wastes are currently exempt from our hazardous waste regulations. So the only entities that we regulate concerning universal waste and hazardous waste are facilities with an EPA ID number, generator number. So if you're in a household, if you're a resident, you're exempt from our regulations. The regulated community of universal waste includes small quantity handlers, which may accumulate less than 11,000 pounds at any one time, large quantity handlers, which may accumulate more than 11,000 pounds at any one time, transporters, and destination facilities. A universal waste handler is defined as anyone that generates, receives, manages, accumulates, or sends universal waste to another universal waste handler, or to a destination facility, or to a foreign destination. And a destination facility is defined as a facility which treats, disposes of, or recycles the universal waste. And universal waste is not required to be shipped on a hazardous waste manifest. Now, universal waste management standards. In general, Handlers must only meet basic standards for container labeling or marking, accumulation time limits, employee training, such as waste handling and emergency response procedures, responses to releases, shipping off-site, and waste management. And this waste management is waste stream specific. Each waste stream has specific regulatory requirements, which we'll be going through shortly. First, container labeling and marking. Universal waste containers must be labeled or marked. Content description is waste specific. And our number one universal waste violation is a facility mislabeling or no marking or labeling at all. And this label on the slide is an example of a typical universal waste label that we see at facilities. And just of note, if a label is not available, the appropriate waste can be written or marked on the container, such as you can write with a Sharpie, waste lamps, waste ballasts, etc. So you don't necessarily have to always have a label. You can mark it by hand on the container. Now, accumulation time limits. How long can you store the universal waste on site? They may not be stored for longer than 1 year from the date the waste is first generated. That is when universal waste begins accumulating in a container. There are a few options to achieve this time requirement, but the easiest way is to write the date on the container or label. Although an inventory system on site may also be used. We usually see the initial date written on each container when we inspect facilities, but we have seen a few facilities using an electronic inventory system, which actually shows the initial accumulation dates, and that's okay as well. Training for universal waste. So both small and large quantity handlers must ensure that all employees are thoroughly familiar with both proper waste handling and emergency procedures. Both of these are relative to their responsibilities during normal operations and emergencies. The proper waste handling would include management requirements, which we will be talking about in a few minutes. As far as emergency response to releases, step one, you should secure the area. Second step is to prevent the hazard from spreading. And you can use specific spill kits for depending on the waste, and such as mercury. There are some of you may be familiar with mercury spill kits. Those are very common. And the third step is to clean up the spill. And depending on the size or nature of the spill, some spills may actually require an outside contractor to be brought in. And the last step is to report the spill. These are just some brief steps in case you do have an emergency on site, but you can go to mercvt.org for more detailed information about mercury spills. The spill reporting requirement, as stated, it is required to be reported, and on the slide shows the numbers, phone numbers to report. And regular office hours, the phone number is 802-828-1138, and that's 7:45 a.m. to 4:30 Monday through Friday, and that's our hazardous waste program number. And if you're outside the hours, the 24 hazmat hotline is 800-641-5005. And for a larger spill or a spill that's going to be impacting surface water, the National Response Center also needs to be notified. And that number is 800-424-8802. And just of note, if a spill does occur, it must be reported to an actual person versus for, say, an email or leaving a voicemail. Any spill of a hazardous waste or material that is more than 2 gallons must be reported. Also needing to be reported as a spill that is less than or equal to 2 gallons that presents a threat, actual threat to human health and the environment. Now, shipping requirements. The off-site shipping requirements are prohibited. A generator is prohibited from taking universal waste to a place other than another handler, destination facility, or foreign destination. And you also need to comply with transporter requirements, which are listed in subchapter 4 of our Vermont Hazardous Waste Management regulations. Small quantity handlers are not required to keep shipping records. However, large quantity handlers must keep records of shipments for 3 years. And the shipments include any universal waste they've received from other handlers. Now let's talk about the universal waste management for various types of the universal waste. And we'll start off with batteries. Batteries need to be managed in a way that prevents releases. And any batteries that show evidence of leakage or spillage and damage that could cause leakage must be placed in a container. And this container must be kept closed, structurally sound, compatible with the contents of the battery. It must also lack evidence of leakage, spillage, or damage that could cause leakage. And there's actually a manufacturer-funded program called Call to Recycle. And you can get more information on batteries at vtrecycles.com and click on the special recycling icon, and that'll take you to the information you need for universal waste batteries. Certain pesticides are also a category of universal waste. We don't see these that much, and it applies to recalled pesticides and unused pesticides, which are collected as part of a waste pesticide collection program at a facility. And just so you'll know, pesticides in general are mainly regulated by the Agency of Agriculture, Food, and Markets. And management for pesticides, again, the container must be kept closed. It must be structurally sound, compatible with the pesticide, and it must lack evidence of leakage, spillage, or damage that could cause a release. As far as the labeling, the container must include the label that was on the product if it is still legible. And it must include the label from waste pesticide collection program, if that is applicable, or you use the words universal waste pesticide or waste pesticides. Mercury thermostats is another type of universal waste, and these must be also placed in containers that are structurally sound, adequate to prevent breakage, and compatible with the thermostat. These containers must be kept closed and lack evidence of leakage, spillage, or damage, and they must be labeled as universal waste mercury thermostats, waste mercury thermostats, or used mercury thermostats. PCB containing fluorescent light ballast. Most of the fluorescent light ballasts in use manufactured before 1979 do contain PCBs. But most ballasts manufactured after 1979 that do not contain PCBs, they are actually labeled no PCBs. Most of them are. If a ballast is not labeled as no PCBs, you should always assume it does contain PCBs and manage it as such. This particular universal waste is also subject to regulation under TSCA, which is the Toxic Substances Control Act. And management of this universal waste, you must manage it in a way that, again, prevents releases. And the ballast showing evidence of any leakage or damage must be immediately contained and transferred to the appropriate container. And you must label or mark clearly with the words universal waste, PCB ballast, or waste PCB ballast, or used PCB ballast. The universal waste we see most commonly at facilities are mercury-containing lamps, also known as fluorescent bulbs. Management standards are quite similar to the other universal waste. The container must be structurally sound, kept closed, and then sealed with tape once full. The container sealed with tape. Do not tape the actual lamps together because tape can easily come off, thus resulting in lamps breaking all over the floor. And tape is not a very secure way to store this waste at all. All containers containing holding universal waste lamps must be labeled or marked with words such as universal waste lamps or waste lamps. And do not stack these containers higher than 5 feet. Stacking of containers less than 5 feet high prevents the crushing of lamps stored in the containers on the bottom of the stack. And it also reduces the chance for containers to tip over. However, waste lamp containers may be stored in an area which is higher than 5 feet, such as up on a shelf, which is safe away from foot or vehicle traffic. It's just you can't stack the stacks cannot be higher than 5 feet. And this waste also must not be stored on site for more than 1 year. And businesses may self-transport mercury-containing lamps to a universal waste handler without a manifest. And this picture that is on the slide was taken at a facility. Very, very crude way of storing the waste lamps. Several obvious requirements are in violation. The bulbs could easily be broken. I mean, those tall lamps is just an accident waiting to happen. And it would definitely create an environment that is hazardous to employees with the mercury being dispersed, possibly being dispersed. The crushing of mercury-containing lamps is not allowed in Vermont. It is allowed in some states, but Vermont is not one of them. Crushing releases mercury vapors that may pose health and environmental risks. And broken bulbs are considered hazardous waste and can no longer be managed as universal waste and therefore must be then managed as hazardous. And any broken lamps should be placed immediately in a sturdy container and kept closed. And the container should be marked or labeled as hazardous waste now, as well as having the mercury waste code marked on it, which is D as in dog 009. And repeating, this waste will now have to be managed as hazardous waste versus universal waste. Mercury-containing devices is a separate category. We've already talked about the fluorescent lamps, the batteries, and the thermostats, but this is specific devices such as switches, relays, gauges, manometers, and barometers. They all contain small amounts of mercury necessary for their operation. Therefore, they need to be managed properly, which is packaging the devices in closed and compatible containers to obviously prevent releases. And these containers must be labeled as universal waste mercury devices, waste mercury devices, or used mercury devices. CRTs, or cathode ray tubes, are a major component of older style computer monitors and television screens. The units may contain up to 4 pounds of lead, which was used to protect the user from X-rays present inside the actual CRT. And this type of universal waste is a little bit different as far as management, because the unit itself needs to be protected as to remain intact. And it must be packaged to prevent breakage during storage, handling, and transport. Since these are large units, we usually see them stacked up on pallets, shrink wrapped, and not in their own individual cardboard container or drum, if you will. And these CRTs must be protected from precipitation while in storage and transport at all times. And the CRTs can be evaluated for reuse or repair on site, or they can be sent off site for evaluation. And the CRTs need to be labeled as universal waste CRTs, used CRTs, or waste CRTs. And we talked a bit about post-consumer paint earlier. This universal waste has been incorporated by statute, but it has not been incorporated into our regulations yet, but it will be soon. But managed as universal waste, these containers must remain closed, structurally sound, and they must be compatible with the paint. The container must be compatible with the paint, and the container must lack evidence of any type of leakage, spillage, or damage. Containers holding the post-consumer paint should be clearly labeled or marked as universal waste paint, used paint, or waste paint. And again, this is the Paint Care program is a manufacturer-funded program which deals specifically with the paint, and a lot more information can be found at vtrecycles.com, and then you click on that recycling icon and you can click on the paint program, or you can just go to the Paint Care program website and it'll tell you everything you need to know. As I stated before, coming soon, we're going to be incorporating the aerosol cans and the post-consumer paint into our hazardous waste regulations, and they will be considered universal waste, obviously if managed as such in this slide presentation. And so once we revise our regulations and we add these two particular types of universal waste, we'll welcome them into our universal waste world. And here's my contact information with my email and cell phone number, as well as our website for hazardous waste in Vermont. And if you have any questions or comments, just feel free to shoot me an email or give me a call. And I appreciate you taking the time to watching this presentation. Thank you so much.